Leroy Williams sat in his office in the heart of New Orleans, his gaze fixed on a framed photograph resting on his polished mahogany desk. The image captured a moment from 3 years ago, when he and his wife, Camille, stood together on the banks of the Mississippi River. Their hands were intertwined, their smiles radiant, their eyes alight with the promise of a shared future. It was a snapshot from the early days of their marriage, a time when love felt unassailable. Now in the autumn of 2018, that warmth had faded, replaced by a growing unease that Leroy could neither name nor ignore. His office, perched on the third floor of a historic building in the central business district, overlooked the bustling streets of New Orleans. The hum of the city, street musicians playing soulful jazz, the clatter of horse-drawn carriages, the chatter of tourists, filtered through the open window, mingling with the faint scent of coffee from the cafe below. Leroy's construction company, though small, had carved out a solid reputation in the city. Contracts for renovating old Creole townhouses and building new commercial spaces kept the business thriving. He had worked hard to build this life, pulling himself up from modest beginnings to become a respected figure in the community. Yet despite his success, a hollow ache had settled in his chest, one that grew sharper with each passing day. Camille, his wife of 3 years, had changed. She worked as a marketing strategist for a local advertising firm, a job that often kept her late into the evening. At first, Leroy had admired her ambition, the way she navigated client meetings with poise and creativity. But recently, her late nights had become more frequent, her explanations vaguer. She would return home with a distracted air, her phone always locked and tucked away, as if guarding secrets. When Leroy asked about her day, her responses were clipped, her smile forced, lacking the warmth that once defined her. He noticed how she checked her messages in stolen moments, her fingers moving quickly over the screen before she set it face down on the table. These small gestures, once insignificant, now felt like clues to a puzzle he dreaded solving. Leroy had always prided himself on his rationality, his ability to approach problems with a clear head. But the seed of doubt about Camille's fidelity had taken root, and no amount of logic could uproot it. It began with fleeting thoughts. Perhaps she was just stressed. Perhaps her work demanded more of her time. But those thoughts grew into darker suspicions, fueled by the way she avoided his gaze or the faint scent of unfamiliar cologne that lingered on her scarf one evening. He tried to dismiss these signs to convince himself that he was imagining things, but the jealousy coiled tighter around his heart, like a vine choking a tree. He could not bear the thought of Camille with another man, yet he could not shake the fear that she was slipping away. Their home, a charming 2-story house in the Garden District, had once been a sanctuary. Its wraparound porch, shaded by ancient oak trees draped in Spanish moss, had been the backdrop for countless evenings spent together, sipping wine and planning their future. Now the house felt like a stage for their growing distance. Dinners were quiet affairs, the clink of silverware against plates louder than their conversation. On one such evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast long shadows across the dining room, Leroy watched Camille push her food around her plate, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. The silence between them was heavy, suffocating, and it was in that moment that he made his decision. He could no longer live with the uncertainty. He needed answers, proof that would either confirm his worst fears or set his mind at ease. That night after Camille had gone to bed, Leroy sat in the dim glow of his study, scrolling through his contacts. A friend from a recent business deal had mentioned a private investigator named Darius Clark, a man known for his discretion and ability to uncover hidden truths. Leroy hesitated, his thumb hovering over the call button. Hiring a detective felt like a betrayal, a step towards shattering the fragile trust that remained in their marriage. But the alternative, living in the shadow of doubt, was unbearable. He made the call. Darius's voice was calm and professional, tinged with the confidence of someone accustomed to navigating the murky waters of human secrets. Leroy explained his concerns, his words halting at first but growing steadier as he laid out his suspicions. He described Camille's late nights, her guarded demeanor, the subtle shifts in her behavior that gnawed at him. Darius listened without interruption, asking only for practical details: Camille's work schedule, her office address, and a recent photograph. Leroy emailed a picture from their last vacation, a candid shot of Camille laughing on a balcony overlooking the French Quarter. Her eyes sparkled in the sunlight, and Leroy felt a pang of guilt as he sent it, as if he were handing over a piece of her soul to a stranger. Darius promised results within 2 weeks, assuring Leroy that he would be thorough yet discreet. The call ended, and Leroy leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. The house was silent, save for the faint creak of the old wooden floors settling in the night. He felt a strange mix of relief and dread. Relief because he had taken action, because someone else would now bear the burden of uncovering the truth. Dread because he knew that truth, whatever it was, would change everything. He rose from his chair and walked to the living room, where the photograph of him and Camille by the Mississippi stood on the mantel. He traced the edge of the frame with his finger, wondering if he was making a mistake. As he climbed the stairs to bed, the weight of his decision settled over him. He did not know that by hiring Darius Clark, he had set in motion a chain of events that would unravel not just his marriage, but the lives of everyone involved. The seed of doubt had been planted, and it was already beginning to grow, its roots reaching deeper than Leroy could have imagined. Darius Clark approached his assignment with the precision of a seasoned professional, his movements as calculated as the ticking of a metronome. He had spent years honing his craft as a private investigator in New Orleans, a city where secrets thrived in the shadows of its vibrant streets. His task was clear: to shadow Camille Williams, observe her routines, and uncover any evidence of infidelity for her husband Leroy. Armed with her photograph, work schedule, and office address, Darius began his surveillance the morning after Leroy's call, blending seamlessly into the rhythm of the city. He followed Camille through the lively chaos of the French Quarter, where the air carried the mingled scents of beignets, chicory coffee, and the faint musk of the Mississippi River. From the driver's seat of his nondescript sedan, parked discreetly across from her advertising firm on St. Charles Avenue, Darius watched her emerge from the glass-fronted building at midday. Her presence was magnetic, her confident stride cutting through the crowd as she navigated the cobblestone streets. She wore a tailored blazer and a skirt that swayed with her steps, her posture exuding a quiet elegance that drew glances from passers-by. Darius, trained to remain detached, found himself noting not just her movements, but the way her eyes softened when she paused to admire a street artist's painting, or the way her laughter carried over the hum of the city when she spoke on her phone. His routine was methodical. Each morning he positioned himself at strategic vantage points, outside her office, near the cafes she frequented, or along the routes she took to meetings. He snapped photographs with a telephoto lens, capturing her in moments of unguarded normalcy. Sipping coffee at a sidewalk table, flipping through a notebook during a client lunch, or adjusting her scarf as she stepped into the humid afternoon air. His notebook filled with meticulous entries, times, locations, and descriptions of her activities. But as the days passed, Darius found himself lingering on details that had no place in a professional report. The way her fingers brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, the faint dimple that appeared when she smiled, the warmth in her voice when she stopped to give directions to a lost tourist. These observations, irrelevant to his assignment, began to crowd his thoughts. By the end of the first week, Darius had pieced together a clearer picture of Camille's life. She worked long hours, often staying late at her firm, her silhouette visible through the office windows as dusk settled over the city. She frequently dined with colleagues at upscale restaurants in the quarter, her laughter mingling with the clink of wine glasses. But one evening, as Darius watched from a shadowed corner of a dimly lit bistro, he noticed a man who stood out among her coworkers. Nathan Reed, a marketing associate from her firm, lingered at her side longer than the others. Their interactions were subtle, a shared glance, a fleeting touch of his hand on her arm as they laughed over a shared joke. But to Darius's trained eye, these moments carried weight. The touch lingered a fraction too long, the smiles too intimate for mere colleagues. Nathan was younger than Leroy, with an easy charm and a tailored suit that spoke of ambition. Darius's camera captured the moment, the shutter clicking silently as he documented the evidence Leroy had hired him to find. Yet when the time came to compile his first report for Leroy, Darius hesitated. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, The photographs of Camille and Nathan spread across his desk in his small, cluttered apartment in Trim. He told himself he needed more conclusive evidence, a clearer sign of betrayal before he could deliver such damning information. But deep down, he knew the truth was more complicated. He did not want to be the one to shatter Camille's life, to expose her to the consequences of her husband's suspicions. The thought of her smile fading, her vibrant spirit dimmed by accusations, stirred something in him he had not felt in years. He closed his laptop, leaving the report unwritten, and instead began to imagine ways to cross her path in a manner that felt less like surveillance and more like fate. The opportunity came on a humid afternoon when Camille sat alone at a small cafe on Royal Street, her lunch untouched as she scrolled through her phone. Darius, dressed in a casual linen shirt to blend with the tourist crowd, approached her table, feigning a need to ask about the menu. He had rehearsed the moment in his mind, calculating the right tone to strike, friendly but not overbearing, curious but not intrusive. Camille looked up, her eyes meeting his with a warmth that caught him off guard. She answered his question with a smile, her voice carrying the soft cadence of someone at ease with strangers. The conversation flowed effortlessly, touching on the city's music scene and the charm of its hidden courtyards. Darius left the cafe with her laughter echoing in his ears, a business card she had playfully handed him tucked into his pocket. As he walked back to his car, the weight of his actions settled over him. He was no longer just an observer, a neutral party hired to uncover the truth. He was stepping into dangerous territory, blurring the lines between his role as a detective and the growing pull he felt toward Camille. His notebook, once filled with objective facts, now held fleeting sketches of her smile, fragments of her laughter, and questions he could not answer. Why did he feel this way? Why did he hesitate to tell Leroy what he had seen? Darius pushed these thoughts aside, focusing instead on the next day's surveillance, but a part of him knew that his heart was no longer in the assignment. He was watching Camille not just to uncover her secrets, but to understand the woman who had begun to occupy his thoughts. A month had passed since Darius Clark first crossed the line from observer to participant in Camille Williams' life, and the boundaries of his professional detachment had all but dissolved. What began as calculated chance encounters in the vibrant streets of New Orleans had evolved into something far more intimate. Darius had memorized Camille's routines with the precision of a cartographer mapping uncharted territory. He knew her favorite cafe on Royal Street, where she lingered over iced coffee on humid afternoons, the quiet bench by the Mississippi, where she read during lunch breaks, the jazz club on Frenchman Street, where she swayed to the music of local bands. Each detail, once noted for Leroy's assignment, now served a different purpose: to draw him closer to her. Their meetings, initially staged by Darius under the guise of coincidence, grew frequent and deliberate. He would appear at the edge of her world, at a bookstore she frequented, or near her office as she stepped out for the evening. And each time, Camille greeted him with a warmth that disarmed him. She seemed to welcome his presence, her laughter easier, her gaze lingering longer with each encounter. Camille, weighed down by the growing strain in her marriage to Leroy, found in Darius a listener who offered no judgment, only quiet attention. Their conversations, once confined to the safe topics of music and city life, deepened into confessions of dreams and frustrations. She spoke of her love for her work, her longing for freedom, and the quiet ache of a marriage that no longer felt like home. Darius, in turn, shared fragments of his own guarded life, careful to reveal just enough to keep her trust without exposing his true role. Their connection soon transcended the public spaces of New Orleans. One evening, after a long walk along the moonlit levee, where the river's gentle lapping provided a backdrop to their shared silence, Darius suggested they find a quieter place to continue their conversation. Camille agreed, her eyes reflecting a mix of curiosity and vulnerability. They drove to a small, unassuming hotel on the outskirts of the city, tucked away in a neighborhood where the neon glow of the French Quarter faded into the stillness of cypress-lined streets. The room was modest, its faded wallpaper and creaking bed a stark contrast to the electric energy between them. There, in the dim light of a single lamp, their relationship crossed into forbidden territory. Darius felt the weight of his betrayal, not just of Leroy, but of his own principles, as he held Camille, her warmth erasing the last vestiges of his restraint. Each subsequent meeting at the hotel deepened their bond, a secret woven into the fabric of their lives. Darius justified his actions with the belief that Camille was trapped in an unhappy marriage, that Leroy's suspicions and controlling nature had driven her away. He convinced himself that he was her savior, offering the affection and understanding her husband withheld. Yet in the quiet moments after their encounters, as Camille slept beside him, Darius could not fully silence the guilt that gnawed at him. He was lying to Leroy, feeding him vague reports that claimed no evidence of infidelity had been found. Each email he sent, each phone call he made, was a careful fabrication designed to buy time and keep Camille's secret safe. But the lies were not just for Leroy, they were for himself, a way to quiet the voice that reminded him he was betraying the very code he had lived by as an investigator. Meanwhile, Leroy's suspicions grew into a consuming obsession. The sparse updates from Darius, brief notes about Camille's work schedule and routine outings, did little to ease his mind. If anything, they fueled his paranoia, as he sensed the detective was holding something back. Leroy began to notice subtle changes in Camille's demeanor, the faint smile that curved her lips when she returned home, the way she hummed softly as she prepared for bed, the newfound lightness in her step. These signs, once markers of their shared happiness, now felt like evidence of her betrayal. He confronted Darius during a tense phone call, his voice sharp with frustration, demanding more detailed reports or threatening to hire another investigator. Darius promised to dig deeper, but his words were hollow, a delay tactic to protect the fragile world he was building with Camille. Caught between his growing love for Camille and Leroy's mounting pressure, Darius felt the walls closing in. He could not allow Leroy to uncover the truth about Camille's affair with Nathan Reed, the colleague whose lingering touches Darius had observed weeks earlier. Nor could he bear the thought of losing Camille, whose presence had become the center of his world. In the quiet of his apartment, as he pored over photographs and notes that should have been sent to Leroy, a darker plan began to take shape. Nathan, with his easy charm and undeniable connection to Camille, was a threat that could unravel everything. Leroy, with his relentless suspicion, was a ticking time bomb, ready to hire someone else who might expose the truth. Darius's mind, once sharp and disciplined, now churned with possibilities that would have horrified him only weeks ago. He saw a path forward, one that required eliminating the obstacles in his way, no matter the cost. As he sat in his car outside the hotel one night, watching Camille's silhouette move behind the curtains, Darius felt the weight of his choices. The city's pulse, its jazz, its laughter, its endless motion, faded into the background, leaving only the rhythm of his own heartbeat. He knew he was crossing a line from which there was no return, but the thought of a life with Camille, free from the shadows of her husband and her lover, was worth any price. The plan forming in his mind was not yet fully realized, but its seeds had taken root, as dangerous and inevitable as the forbidden bond he had forged. Darius Clark had always prided himself on his moral compass, a guiding force that kept him grounded in the murky world of private investigation. But the love he felt for Camille Williams had warped that compass, twisting his principles into something unrecognizable. Where once he saw his work as a pursuit of truth, he now saw obstacles, living, breathing threats to the future he envisioned with her. Nathan Reed, Camille's colleague and lover, was no longer just a rival in Darius's mind. He was a danger, a man whose charm and connection to Camille could unravel everything Darius had built. Equally pressing was Leroy Williams, Camille's husband, whose growing paranoia and relentless demands for answers threatened to expose the truth Darius had buried. As the humid nights of New Orleans pressed against his skin, Darius's thoughts darkened, his mind crafting a plan as precise and cold as a surgical blade. Nathan was the first to fall. Darius had tracked him for days, mapping his routines with the same meticulous care he had once applied to Camille's surveillance. Nathan lived in a stylish apartment in the Garden District, a renovated Creole cottage surrounded by magnolia trees and wrought iron fences. On a moonless night, when the city's usual vibrancy was dulled by a heavy mist rolling in from the Mississippi, Darius followed him home. He parked his sedan a block away, blending into the shadows of the quiet street, and watched as Nathan's silhouette moved through the glow of his living room window. The younger man was unaware, His guard lowered as he tossed his keys onto a table and flicked on the television, its flickering light casting eerie patterns across the room. Darius slipped on a pair of gloves, his movements deliberate, and retrieved the revolver he kept hidden in a locked case beneath his car's passenger seat. It was a .38 caliber, untraceable, reserved for moments he had always hoped would never come. He crossed the street, his footsteps silent on the damp pavement, and entered the unlocked back door of Nathan's apartment, a careless habit Darius had noted during his surveillance. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of cedar and leather, the faint hum of the television masking his presence. Nathan sat on a couch, his back to the door, oblivious to the shadow that loomed behind him. Darius raised the revolver, his hand steady despite the pulse pounding in his ears. A single shot to the back of Nathan's head ended his life instantly, his body slumping forward without a sound, the television's glow illuminating the stillness that followed. Darius worked quickly, his training overriding any flicker of remorse. He staged the scene to suggest a robbery gone wrong, overturning a side table, scattering papers, and pocketing Nathan's wallet to obscure his motive. He wiped down surfaces he might have touched, his gloved hands moving with practiced efficiency. The New Orleans police, stretched thin by the city's endless stream of crimes, would likely classify it as another unsolved break-in, especially in a neighborhood where petty theft was not uncommon. As he slipped back into the night, the mist swallowing his retreating figure, Darius felt a surge of control, a belief that he had eliminated one half of the threat to his future with Camille. But Leroy remained a problem, his suspicions a ticking clock that Darius could not ignore. Leroy's calls had grown more frequent, his tones sharper, laced with frustration at Darius's vague reports. He had begun to question Darius's competence, hinting at hiring another investigator, someone who might uncover the truth about Camille's affair with Nathan, or worse, Darius's own involvement. The thought of another detective prying into Camille's life, exposing her secrets and dragging Darius's lies into the light, was intolerable. He devised a plan to deal with Leroy, one that required the same ruthless precision he had applied to Nathan's elimination. 3 nights later, Darius contacted Leroy, arranging a meeting at an abandoned warehouse on the city's industrial outskirts, near the muddy banks of a canal that snaked into the bayou. He claimed to have uncovered critical evidence, too sensitive to discuss over the phone, and Leroy, desperate for answers, agreed without hesitation. The warehouse, its rusted metal walls and broken windows, shrouded in darkness, was the perfect setting for what Darius had planned. He arrived early, scouting the area to ensure no one was nearby, the only sounds the distant croak of bullfrogs and the rustle of wind through the overgrown reeds. When Leroy's car pulled up, its headlights cutting through the night, Darius stood in the shadows, the revolver once again in his hand. Leroy stepped out, his face etched with exhaustion and suspicion, his eyes scanning the empty lot. Darius emerged from the darkness, his expression unreadable, and gestured for Leroy to follow him inside. The warehouse's interior was a cavern of echoes, its concrete floor littered with debris. Before Leroy could question the setting, Darius raised the revolver and fired, the shot echoing like a thunderclap in the hollow space. Leroy collapsed, his body crumpling to the ground, his eyes wide with shock in the fleeting moment before life left them. Darius acted swiftly, dragging the body to his car and driving to a secluded stretch of bayou miles from the city. There, under the cover of night, he slid Leroy's body into the murky water, knowing the alligators that lurked in the depths would erase any trace of his crime. As he drove back to the city, the lights of New Orleans flickering in the distance, Darius felt a fleeting sense of invincibility. He had removed both Nathan and Leroy, clearing the path to a life with Camille. The weight of his actions lingered, but he pushed it aside, focusing instead on the image of her smile, her touch, the future they could build. He believed he had outsmarted the world, that his careful calculations had secured his prize. In the solitude of his car, with the hum of the engine and the distant wail of a saxophone drifting from the city, Darius allowed himself to imagine a life free of rivals, unaware that the very woman he sought to possess would soon become his undoing. Camille Williams moved through the days following Leroy's disappearance and Nathan's murder in a haze of grief and confusion, her once vibrant world now cloaked in shadows. The news of Nathan's death, reported as a robbery gone wrong in the Garden District, had struck her like a physical blow, her mind replaying their stolen moments together. Late-night dinners, shared laughter, the warmth of his touch. She blamed herself, convinced that her affair with him had somehow invited the tragedy, that her choices had set off a chain of events she could not comprehend. Leroy's absence compounded her torment. He had vanished without a trace, his phone unanswered, his office untouched, leaving only questions that the New Orleans police seemed ill-equipped to answer. In the midst of this chaos, Darius Clark emerged as her anchor, offering comfort with a steady presence that masked the darkness of his own actions. Darius was always there, his calm demeanor a balm to Camille's frayed nerves. He appeared at her doorstep with coffee on mornings when she could barely rise from bed, sat with her in the quiet of her Garden District home as she wrestled with guilt, and listened as she poured out her fears about what had happened to Leroy and Nathan. His reassurances were measured, his touch gentle, and his eyes filled with a sincerity that made her want to believe he was her refuge. Yet beneath his comforting facade, Camille began to notice inconsistencies that pricked at her instincts. He knew too much, details about her favorite haunts, her work schedule, even the way she took her coffee, things she had never shared with him. When she asked about his day, his answers were vague, his smile a touch too practiced, as if he were guarding a truth she was not meant to see. The first crack in her trust appeared one evening, when she reached into Darius's jacket, searching for his car keys after he offered to drive her to a meeting. Her fingers brushed against a folded photograph, tucked into an inner pocket. Curiosity overcame her, and she unfolded it, her breath catching as she recognized herself in the image, sitting across from Nathan at a cafe on Royal Street. The date scrawled on the back, weeks before she had met Darius, sent a chill through her. The photograph was not a casual snapshot. It was taken from a distance, the angle suggesting surveillance. Her mind raced back to a conversation with Leroy, months earlier, when he had mentioned hiring a private investigator to watch her. The pieces began to align, and a seed of suspicion took root, though she buried it beneath a forced smile as she returned the jacket to its place. Camille's unease grew with each passing day, her sharp mind piecing together the inconsistencies in Darius's behavior. She noticed how he always seemed to appear when she needed him most, as if he anticipated her movements. His stories about his work as a consultant were thin, lacking the detail of someone immersed in their profession. She began to watch him more closely, noting the way he glanced at his phone when he thought she wasn't looking, the way he deflected questions about his past with a charming laugh. Determined to uncover the truth, she took cautious steps to investigate the man who had become her confidant. She memorized the times he left her side, checked the call logs on his phone when he stepped away, and noted the addresses he visited when he claimed to be running errands. One sleepless night, as Darius lay asleep in the guest room of her home, Camille seized her chance. She crept into the living room, where his laptop sat on a coffee table, its screen dark but beckoning. Her heart pounded as she powered it on, her fingers trembling as she guessed his password, a combination of his initials and a date she had overheard him mention. The screen flickered to life, revealing a trove of files that confirmed her worst fears. There were reports addressed to Leroy, detailing her movements over months, her lunches with Nathan, her late nights at the office, her walks along the levee. Each entry was clinical, precise, the work of a man who had watched her life unfold from the shadows. Buried deeper in the folders was a series of photographs, some of her and Nathan, others of a desolate stretch of bayou she recognized from news reports, the same place where traces of Leroy's belongings had been found, though his body remained missing. The images shook Camille to her core, her hands shaking as she clicked through them. The bayou photographs showed muddy banks and tangled roots, a place where secrets could be swallowed by the swamp. She realized Darius had not just been watching her, he had been orchestrating a deception that stretched far beyond her affair with Nathan. Her guilt over Leroy's disappearance and Nathan's death twisted into a new, sharper fear that Darius was not merely a bystander, but a player in a game she had yet to understand. She closed the laptop, her mind racing with the implications. Confronting him was too dangerous. She needed to act carefully, to gather more evidence before she could expose him. Camille spent the following days playing the role of the grieving, trusting partner, masking her suspicion behind soft smiles and gentle touches. She began to carry a small notebook, jotting down every detail of Darius's movements, every inconsistency in his stories. She contacted a friend in the police department, a discreet inquiry about the status of Leroy's case, hoping to glean information without raising alarms. Each step she took was calculated, her fear tempered by a resolve to uncover the truth. As she sat across from Darius at dinner, his eyes warm with affection, she felt the weight of her discovery pressing against her chest. The man who had promised to protect her was a liar, and possibly something far worse. The illusion of safety he had crafted was crumbling, and Camille knew she had to tread carefully to avoid becoming the next piece of his carefully constructed plan. Camille Williams steeled herself to maintain the facade of affection and trust, her every interaction with Darius Clark calculated to conceal the growing dread that consumed her. She had uncovered enough to know he was not the man he claimed to be, his lies woven into the fabric of their relationship like threads of a spider's web. Determined to expose him, she moved with quiet precision, her outward warmth masking the fear that pulsed beneath her skin. She contacted Marcus Evans, a seasoned detective with the New Orleans Police Department, whose reputation for tenacity had reached her through a mutual acquaintance. In a discreet meeting at a quiet diner on the edge of the city, she shared her suspicions, laying out the photograph from Darius's jacket, the incriminating files on his laptop, and the chilling connection to the bayou where traces of Leroy's belongings had been found. Marcus listened intently, his expression unreadable, but his eyes sharp with interest. He knew of Darius's reputation, a private investigator who often skirted the edges of legality, and saw in Camille's evidence a chance to unravel a case that had haunted the department. Marcus proposed a plan to trap Darius, one that required Camille to play her role flawlessly. Though fear gnawed at her, she agreed, driven by a need to uncover the truth and protect herself from the man who had infiltrated her life. She chose a public setting for their next encounter, a bustling cafe on Frenchman Street, where the hum of conversation and the clink of glasses provided a shield of anonymity. The cafe, with its exposed brick walls and flickering candlelight, was a place they had visited before, a backdrop to their stolen moments that now felt tainted by deception. Camille invited Darius for dinner, her invitation delivered with a practiced smile that hid the weight of her intentions. She dressed carefully, choosing a simple black dress that mirrored the elegance she knew he admired, her every move calculated to keep him at ease. As they sat across from each other, the air thick with the aroma of Creole spices and the distant wail of a saxophone, Camille began to probe. She asked innocuous questions at first, about his day, his plans, lulling him into a false sense of security. Then, with deliberate care, she steered the conversation toward the photograph she had found, mentioning it casually, as if it were a passing curiosity. Darius's reaction was immediate, his face paling, his fingers tightening around his glass. He tried to redirect the conversation, his voice smooth but strained. But Camille pressed on, her questions growing sharper. She mentioned Nathan's name, then Leroy's, watching as his usual confidence fractured, his eyes darting to the side as if searching for an escape. When she leaned forward, her gaze steady, and asked how he always seemed to know where she would be, his hand shot out, gripping her wrist with a force that betrayed his panic. Camille's heart raced, but she remained composed, her other hand slipping into her purse to press the record button on a small dictaphone she had hidden there. The dinner ended abruptly, Darius excusing himself with a forced smile, claiming a sudden work emergency. Camille watched him leave, her pulse steadying as she realized the recording had captured his unease, his unguarded reactions to her questions. She met Marcus later that night, handing over the dictaphone and detailing the encounter. Marcus and his team moved swiftly, their suspicions confirmed by Camille's evidence. They descended on Darius's apartment in Trem, under the cover of darkness, their search yielding the revolver hidden in a locked drawer, its ballistics later matching the bullet found in Nathan's apartment. The files on his laptop, combined with Camille's testimony and the recorded dinner, painted a damning picture of a man who had orchestrated 2 murders to clear his path to a woman he could never truly possess. Darius was arrested as he returned home, his expression one of cold defiance as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. In the interrogation room, faced with the overwhelming evidence, he confessed to the murders of Nathan Reed and Leroy Williams. His words were devoid of remorse, his voice steady as he claimed his actions were driven by love for Camille, a twisted belief that he was securing their future. The confession, recorded and documented, sealed his fate. Months later, Camille stood in a crowded courtroom, her posture rigid as she listened to the judge deliver Darius's sentence. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. The gavel's echo marked the end of a chapter, but it brought her no solace. Camille returned to her empty home in the Garden District, the once warm space now a hollow reminder of the life she had lost. The photograph of her and Leroy by the Mississippi sat on the mantel, its frame gathering dust. She stared at it, her fingers tracing the outlines of their smiles, guilt and grief intertwining in her chest. The vibrant pulse of New Orleans, its music, its lights, its ceaseless energy, felt distant, as if the city had become a stranger. She had survived, had ensured that Darius's crimes were exposed, but the cost was staggering. She had lost her husband, her lover, and a piece of herself to the shadows of betrayal. Yet in the quiet of her home, Camille felt a flicker of resolve. She had faced the truth, however bitter, and in doing so had ensured it would not vanish into the murky depths of Louisiana's bayous.